In this video, we're talking about a father who one day experienced a terrifying turn of events unfolding before he really even knew what hit him, causing him to disappear in the dead of the night. Brandon was a family man, born and raised in Fort Worth, Texas, and as far as his family knew him, he grew up very happy with a fulfilling and warm childhood. He also really enjoyed being active and spent many hours of every day being outdoors with his brothers Kyle and Billy and his sister Brittany. He was even an enthusiast of pickup trucks, and he really wanted to get his own one day. Brandon eventually married his long-term girlfriend of 10 years named Ledessa. They would eventually move to San Angelo, Texas, and begin starting their own family of having 3 kids, and Ledessa would actually become a stepmother in her own right from another child that Brandon had based on a previous relationship when he was younger. As an adult, he would eventually look for a blue-collar type of physical work, and he would find himself a job working in oil fields. And with the daily labor of this stressful job, working overtime every single week, one of his kids were a newborn, which added another stress factor of just trying to find his way as a father. And it eventually brought out a new adventure for him. This new adventure was something that would bring out his dark side. He became a drug addict. And we're not talking about just popping a Tylenol here and there to ease the aches and pains of the body working in this labor-intensive environment. He turned to a very deadly, very hard drug, methamphetamine. And it wouldn't just be his new addiction. It would soon take over his entire existence. It was changing him. The stress, he couldn't handle it, and his behavior was starting to become a problem. He would become uncharacteristically aggravated, irritable all the time. One day, he was trying to get his fix, and he was having trouble doing so. He contacted everyone that he had previously bought from before, and it was just not available for him, and he was becoming desperate. So his last resort was turning to one of his brothers, Kyle, who he would eventually call in the pretty late evening hours of August 7th, 2013, to see if Kyle knew where to find some meth. Meanwhile, on this same night that he called his brother to see if he knew where to find the drug, he kept driving around to see if he could find it on any street corner and get his fix. But at the same time, Ledessa would call him, and they would end up getting into an argument. She didn't want him out and about. She wanted him home that night, and that's what they were arguing about. Brandon couldn't even think about what she was asking him to do. He was going through a withdrawal, and instead of going back home to his family that night, he would stay out throughout all hours of the night in San Angelo, driving around every street corner. And while Brandon never actually found the drug, he would just stay roaming around all night in his truck looking for it, but turned up with nothing. And eventually, he did get back home the following night on the 8th. But as he was walking back into the house, Ledessa was there waiting for him, and she wasn't okay with him just reappearing, and she brought this up to him, which sparked yet another argument between the two of them. This time, they were yelling at each other, getting in each other's faces as she was trying to get to the bottom of this, why he was acting out like this. And well, Brandon, he didn't even really consider what she was saying in that moment as they were arguing in each other's faces. He was too irritated from not being able to find his fix. So after about 20 minutes of them just arguing back and forth, getting nowhere with it, he just got up and left. And this time, instead of him trying to drive around San Angelo yet again to find a dealer, he would instead decide to drive out of that town and drive 4 hours away to another town called Crowley, which is where his own father was staying and living. On the road, there he was on his way to his father's house at almost midnight, and the entire ride there, he was just angry. He couldn't contain himself. He was too irritated. He wasn't really even all mentally there, and he couldn't even really gather himself to continue driving, and he was already 45 minutes into the drive. It was almost 1 a.m. now. Unknown to Brandon in the dead of the night of the moment, because he couldn't really think clearly about anything at this point really, but his gas tank in his truck was basically empty before he had even left Ledessa in that heat of the moment, and it ended up running out of gas, leaving him stranded there on the side of Route 277 in between San Angelo and Crowley. While he was trying to figure out his next move, as he realized he wasn't going anywhere now that his truck wasn't going anywhere, he decided to yet again call Kyle, his brother. But this time, it wasn't so that he could try and find his drugs. It was because he started to realize that he wasn't actually alone out there on Route 277. While he was on the phone with Kyle, he couldn't even really understand what Brandon was saying to him. He was in this serious state of panic, hyperventilating, stuttering. Kyle couldn't understand a word he was saying, but he was trying to explain that something was closing in on him. He even thought, maybe Brandon is high again and he's hallucinating, and that's probably why he called him again. But then Brandon started yelling again over and over, trying to articulate his sentence, and finally, Kyle heard one clear sentence out of him. Brandon said, "3 people are chasing me out of town." And Kyle was like, "What? What are you talking about?" And Brandon yet again yelled at him, saying, "3 Mexicans are chasing me out of town, trying to hunt me down. I need help. I'm not high. I'm not using right now. I need your help." And he was hurt already on the other end of the line. Because after he told Kyle that he was being chased out of town, Kyle also could have sworn that he also heard Brandon say, "I am bleeding and I need help." But after that, Kyle really couldn't get a word in, because somehow the call just got cut off. And now Kyle didn't know if maybe he dropped his phone and it got cut off, or maybe he was being attacked in that moment by whatever was trying to harm him and made him bleed. So now Kyle was trying to get his bearings and trying to understand what he had just heard over the phone. Kyle also actually had his own wife and 4-year-old son at home, and he didn't want to just pull the same stunt that Brandon had just pulled on his own family. So he got his wife and his toddler, and he brought them with him to drive all the way out to Route 277 to see where Brandon might have been stranded. The reports of this case also state that Brandon wasn't only making this panicking and frantic group of phone calls to his brother, he was also trying to get a hold of 911. And in that call to the 911 dispatcher, that he was in danger, he ran out of gas, and he was all alone. There were just far too many circumstances happening now. Brandon left everyone out of the loop, not including how he was a drug addict, and how half the time he didn't even present himself or act how they knew him, how he grew up to be. He was a completely different person in their eyes right now. And especially when these dispatchers would send out a group of police officers out to that road of where Brandon was stranded. As a deputy arrived on scene of where Brandon was last known to be, based on his phone calls to 911 in the first place, well, they did find his truck, but Brandon was nowhere to be found, and there weren't even really any signs around his truck as to where he might have even gone. A police report that those deputies made as they arrived on scene trying to scout the area, and they said that there was literally no sign of Brandon even around his truck. Well, what they did find was something just a few feet away, where it was a spot underneath a tree that looked like almost as if someone just kind of sat there on the ground for a little while. But still, nobody knew where he ended up, why he never showed up to his father's house, or where else he could have even gone. And as those police were starting to try and just investigate who Brandon even really was, and they were doing a background check on his record, they had actually found also something strange, and it was that he had withdrawn some cash out of his 401k from that oil field job just a couple of days before all of this happened. He was actually planning to start a new job just in the next following days. The man was trying to get his life back together. He was trying to get himself back on track, so his family never really believed that he would just pack up and vanish out of the blue in the middle of the night, especially the way that his truck was left there. They were now starting to conduct some interviews, and especially with Kyle, which his brother was there on site, they asked him a few questions, and he responded saying, my brother might have been a felon. He might have done some drugs and messed up here and there, and he might have even relapsed. But he was a good man. He cared about his kids. He cared about his wife. Little did his brother know that as he was being interviewed by these police officers, Brandon was actually there still in the area. He was just nowhere in sight, but he was watching from the darkness his brother being interviewed the whole time. Kyle, as he was being interviewed with these police officers, and as he finished, he got messages from Brandon, where Brandon said, "Hey, I see you. I saw you as you got here, and I've been watching you this whole time being interviewed by these police officers." But as he finished his interview and he was reading these messages, he looked up, but as he started to look for Brandon, he still couldn't see him, and now, for some reason, he couldn't get back in contact with him through his phone. He thought, maybe Brandon was hiding out. He had a record, so he didn't want to get involved with the police. Maybe he was trying to avoid all of this in the first place. And a few hours had passed at this point. It was now 8 a.m. the next morning. And after the cops had waited a while, well, they had enough. So they ended up towing his truck away. And as this background check and the interviews took place, not only did they know that he was a felon and had done jail time before, but he also had a warrant out for his arrest. This prompted their investigation to become even bigger. So now they brought out even more detectives. Now they brought in some thermal imaging cameras to try and see if they could see his body heat from a distance. And they brought out 6 cadaver dogs along with them. They all eventually searched around the entire area for about half a mile, but they came up with nothing. And he was still nowhere to be found or known to be at all. They thought that he was still on foot. And even the local county sheriff's office thought he's not even in the same county anymore. He's long gone, so good luck with that. Ledezza even ended up hiring a private investigator who would then hire another team of 10 people who would then conduct their own search, a more thorough, in-depth, personalized search for Brandon. They all sort of came up with this concept as a family where they thought, Brandon is going through a lot. He's probably just off on his own, catching a breather from life for a few days. And he's probably going through these hallucinations and just needs to sweat all of this out. And ultimately, they kind of left it alone for a little while, hoping that he would just return back home. Literally a whole decade later, in February of 2022, is when anything about Brandon resurfaced, because a local person that was walking along the area where his truck was initially left that night on the side of the highway, they ended up walking over some clothes. Some old clothes buried beneath all of the debris that had piled over those 10 years. And those clothes ended up being tested. And the investigators found upon those testings that they did have Brandon's DNA on them. They ended up finding human remains where that clothes was. They did more thorough DNA test results of the clothes and of those human remains. And what they found them to be were Brandon died out there somehow, chopped up, and his remains were buried under the rubble of nature over the course of those 10 years, out where his brother Kyle had initially thought he was texting him from that night. They never really found out what exactly ever really did happen after all. Ledezza didn't know how to feel. She said that she just felt like that was kind of it. She couldn't really fathom that they were his human remains, and she was just trying to mostly focus on raising her kids instead, now that they were teenagers. What do you think happened to Brandon?